Welcome to Breathe, a podcast series by the Africa Biodiversity Collaborative Group, that's ABCG, where we take you on a captivating journey into the world of Africa's biodiversity conservation. In this podcast, we strive to be at the forefront of biodiversity conservation efforts, delving into the intricacies of Africa's diverse ecosystems, extraordinary wildlife, and unparalleled landscapes. Our aim is to shed light on the pressing issues facing Africa's biodiversity, ignite action, and foster collaborations that bring about effective solutions. Join us as we engage with leading experts, passionate conservationists, and local communities who work tirelessly to safeguard Africa's natural heritage. Whether you're a nature enthusiast, scientist, policymaker, or simply curious about the environment, this podcast is tailor-made for you. Together, let's embark on a journey to understand, protect, and celebrate the immense beauty and irreplaceable natural heritage of Africa. Welcome to this yet exciting episode of Breathe. I'm your host, Laban Clifonserio. Today, we will talk about the Global Biodiversity Framework, its purpose, and more importantly, its role to safeguard and sustainably use biodiversity. So what is the Global Biodiversity Framework and why is it important to us in Africa? Tell your story. On the 19th of December 2022, the United Nations Biodiversity Conference, that's COP15, ended with a landmark agreement to guide global action on nature through to 2030. Now, representatives from 196 governments adopted the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, that's GBF. That was on the last day of the negotiations. Now, the GBF aims to address biodiversity loss, restore ecosystems, and protect indigenous rights. Now, the plan includes concrete measures to halt and reverse nature loss, including putting 30% of the planet and 30% of degraded ecosystems under protections, that's by the year of 2030. It also contains proposals to increase finance to developing countries, a major sticking point during talks. The stakes could not be higher. The planet is experiencing a dangerous decline in nature as a result of human activity. It is experiencing its largest loss of life since the dinosaurs. Now, 1 million plant and animal species are now threatened with extinctions, many within decades.
With protocols now observed, I'm here to speak to you about the role of Global Biodiversity Framework in achieving.
That is Frederick Kwame Kumah, the Vice President of the Global Leadership at the Africa Wildlife Foundation, that's AWF. That was at a recent science workshop organized by the Africa Biodiversity Collaborative Group, that's ABCG. That was right here in Nairobi, Kenya.
Undoubtedly, nature and its biodiversity underpin all economic activities and human well-being.
At the workshop, Frederick was the keynote speaker where he talked about the role of GBF in achieving sustainable development in Africa. With his deep engagement in the Africa Wildlife Foundation, that's AWF, Fred leads interactions with government and multilateral bodies across Africa, China, and Europe. But what does the Africa Wildlife Foundation do?
The Africa Wildlife Foundation is the oldest and largest, the Pan-African international organization. We were founded in 1961. We are headquartered in Nairobi, Karen, actually. We have a representative office in 14 other countries and one in Washington, D.C. We are the primary advocate for Africa's wildlife. Our mission is to ensure that wildlife and their habitats are an essential part of modern and prosperous Africa. It is our conviction that the survival of wildlife and healthy ecosystems in Africa hinges on one factor: linking Africa's conservation agenda in meaningful ways to the aspirations and mindsets of African people. This is what AWF truly represents.
In his opening remarks at the science workshop, Frederick began by highlighting the economic benefit of nature and the financial impact of unsustainable production and consumption practices.
Most of you may know that in the last 200 years, mankind, through industrial revolution, has lost more biodiversity than we have lost in the last 4,000 years. And this is essentially because of our ways of developing today. Undoubtedly, nature and its biodiversity underpin all economic activities and human well-being, both continentally and globally. The total benefits arising from nature is estimated to be at least $125 trillion annually. However, the predominant economic models fail to fully quantify and cost the benefits and services that biodiversity offers society. Existing economic growth and wealth generation models are based on unsustainable production and consumption patterns. As home to over a third of the global economic ecosystem, nature essentially presents Africa an untapped investment and green development opportunity, and is a key strategic asset that can be used as a bargaining power in the global negotiations and arena for Africa. The global biodiversity conservation and climate agenda cannot succeed without Africa, and it needs to be twined. Biodiversity and climate needs to be twined going forward.
A new study mapping the potential scale of forest restoration globally shows that prioritizing 1.5 billion hectares of degraded forest, an area almost the size of Russia, could significantly boost effectiveness of meeting climate and biodiversity goals. The results of the study are described in the Conservation Biology Journal by Dr. Kendall Jones, a planning specialist at the Wildlife Conservation Society. He shares that mapping degraded forest areas means coming to restoration decisions with better information and a better representation of the opportunities, especially those that will bring rapid biodiversity gains, strengthened climate resilience, and valuable benefits for local communities. According to the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity, climate change and biodiversity loss as well as pollution are part of an interlinked triple planetary crisis the world is facing today. They need to be tackled together if we are to advance the Sustainable Development Goals and secure a viable future on this planet. As African residents, we often underestimate the value of our natural resources and the untapped investment potential they hold. So, what is the impact of the GBF agreement to Africa's biodiversity conservation efforts, and why is it important for Africa to be at the negotiating table?
This agreement has provided a mixed outcome for Africa. Though on the balance, the agreement has what it takes for Africa and the world to make substantial progress towards reaching the 2030 targets and goals of the GBF. Let me take you through what this means for Africa in a little more detail. A key negotiation position for Africa has been the nexus between conservation of nature and the meeting of people's needs, with a keen focus on mobilizing resources commensurate, equal to the ambition of the biodiversity agreements themselves. So if we are talking about targets and goals, we cannot talk about that in absence of its link with people and also in link with the resources necessary to deliver them. If you have a target, you need to provide the resources for it. The prioritization of restoration of degraded lands was a key ask of Africa, and that got into the agreement. So the focus is not just on protecting nature, but it's also on protecting and restoring degraded lands, which Africa was keen on. Attaining these results within the boundaries of national priorities and in respect of the rights of indigenous people and local communities, and enabling sustainable use of natural resources where appropriate was a key ask for Africa. If you all do know, and we have cases all across Africa where local communities and indigenous people have been displaced because of expansion of protected areas. And what Africa demanded was, this cannot continue. What we need to do is to conserve and protect, but within the laws of the country, within the national development needs of the countries, but also with respect to the rights of people. These conditions suited Africa, and Africa's negotiation position was firm on that. The framework also delivered massively for people on the strength of the rights to sustainable use within the limits of customary use of indigenous people and local communities. The affirmation of sustainable use of wildlife species and products was a position of the African constituency as deemed necessary within the limits of sustainable development. This was a major win for Africa in terms of its negotiation position, and one that aligns with the meeting of the needs of its people.
Gaining and understanding of how the GBF benefits our continent was truly enlightening. This was particularly evident in the breakdown Fred provided regarding the valuation of our natural resources to finance Africa's developmental goals.
While there are no comprehensive studies around the true economic value of Africa's natural assets, in 2018, Africa's measured natural capital was estimated to be $6.2 trillion, with its minerals and fossil fuel resources respectively at $290 billion and $1.05 trillion. In the energy sector alone, Africa's renewables capacities output is estimated to increase from 27.4 gigawatts in 2023 to over 280 gigawatts in 2035. With an estimated 60% of Africa's GDP coming from natural resources, the continent has enormous potential to benefit further from its natural resources as capital that finances its development ambition. In essence, we have natural resources that can sustain our development growth. What we need to do is to be smart at using it, and we need to understand that potential is there. You see, the resources we own mostly are not in our control at times because we don't have the expertise to exploit them. And what has happened in the past is that others have come in, taken these resources, especially the genetic resources, and not giving us due benefits and rights to them. And what we've said now in this agreement is that nothing is taken out of Africa without benefit to Africa, which is really, really important. And that benefit can actually finance our entire global biodiversity needs in terms of resources. So it's really, really significant.
With a thorough overview of Africa's abundant natural resources, ensuring their sustainability becomes a pivotal responsibility for our continent. For example, the African rainforests are rich in biodiversity, containing countless plant species with medicinal properties. The rosy periwinkle, native to Madagascar, has been used to develop drugs for treating childhood leukemia. Moreover, African traditional medicine systems have relied on a wide range of plants and herbs for various remedies. We see that discoveries like this can be pivotal not only in benefiting the African continent by generating income, but also providing the rest of the world with resources that are beneficial to them. This is why it's important to safeguard our biodiversity. Another critical aspect for Africa that came out during this workshop is the dissemination of this vital information to the community.
It is the role of media to continue speaking about the linkages between conservation and other highly prioritized sectors such as health, education, and infrastructure development on this continent. So you, my friends, wield the power to shift the narrative for ensuring conservation is given the priority and attention it deserves in order to push for the much needed transformation today. For so long, the conservation story has been told, but not with an African perspective. But even then, when it is told, mostly told through the lens of science and animals. And I heard you all introducing yourselves as the environmental and science expert. And so the stories are told from the perspective of science and animals, which is good, but not good enough. The stories need to be told with the African people at the heart of the stories. It needs to be told with a focus on culture and of heritage and of use of those resources and of knowledge and aspirations of this continent. Because if the stories are told just from the perspective of conservation and protection, without the needs of people, we are missing something out there. And that's why people push back on us. The stories must be told with everything. Everything needs to come together.
So what is the key takeout that we should all focus on as Africans with regards to the Global Biodiversity Framework? This is what Fred had to say.
So I think the Global Biodiversity Framework needs to address the four main goals. One is to conserve nature. The second is to meet people's needs. The third is to ensure that the benefits derived of nature are shared equitably. And the fourth is to ensure that there is an enabling environment for the agreements reached to happen, which includes money behind it, okay? And my views are that we need to keep track on all those four goals. Far too often, the focus is on conserving nature and not thinking about meeting people's needs. Far too often, when we're thinking about people's needs, we don't think about benefit sharing. So communities on the ground need to benefit. And then far too often, we have all these agreements and we don't have the resources to support them. So bringing those four pieces together, I think, is critical. And I think the next step, especially for this community, the media fraternity, is to hold us all to account on these agreements, to track the commitments. These agreements are made so that people know publicly what countries are committing to. And media should hold us to account to say, look, Kenya, communities on the ground, this is what we've agreed. So let's make it happen. Let that translate into domestic policies and regulations. And let's, as media fraternity, also tell the story to say this is what we are collectively aiming towards. For me, it's a whole of society obligation and not just government, although government signs these agreements. In the end, the impact, it's across the board. So we should all come together in delivering the goals and agreements that have been agreed.
In this episode, we've gained insights into the significance of the Global Biodiversity Framework and the need to avoid underestimating our natural resources. Preserving Africa's biodiversity is not only vital for the continent's ecological balance, but also for sustaining its economic and cultural heritage. My aspiration is that through this episode, we've developed a greater sense of gratitude for our natural surroundings and a heightened commitment to its preservation, recognizing its role in securing our future. I leave you with the words of Elizabeth Murema, the Executive Secretary of the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity, and she says, "Climate change is a primary driver of biodiversity loss, and climate change depends on biodiversity as part of the solution. The two cannot be separated." I've been your host, Laban Clifon Serio. Thank you so much for being with us here today. Remember to subscribe, like, share, and connect with us. Explore more on our website. That's on www.abcg.org. Follow us on our Twitter handle. That's @ABCGConserve. Connect with us on Facebook, and while at it, like our page. That's @ABCGConserve. Until our next episode, remember to breathe, enjoy, and take care of our planet.